Hello, we continue working on the address book project. So far, we were able to create the model, the contact person class, and the contact person data source. We also added our table view controller, and we were able to connect it with our contact person data source and display a list of contacts. The two big pieces left is to add a new contact and to display the details of that contact. By that, I mean in the contact person, we defined a first name, a last name, and an email address, and I used only three for the sake of time, but you're welcome to add as many details for each contact as you would like. But the list only shows a subset. It shows the first name and the last name. So we need a mean to display all of it. So if you click on or select a name, it should display to you the details of that name. In our iteration plan, we had iteration 5 to add the new contact and iteration 6 to display the contact details. I want to reverse those and display the contact details first, or work on displaying the contact details first, and then work on adding the new contact. So we'll do that. Why did I do this reason? These two are a little bit independent operations. So you could, if you were a team of two, you can have one. You can work in parallel. One person working on the add new contact, the other one working on display contact. If you're by yourself, it's whatever you would like. Originally, I thought add new contact will help us manage the list, whereas contact details is kind of a little bit different. So I display the list and add to it. But then I feel like the displaying contact details will be quicker and easier, so I want to get that out of the way first before work on adding a new contact. So that's what I'm going to go with, work on displaying the contact details. And it is okay to adjust to the iteration plan. If you were doing some project management, you want to be careful of the impact that will have on your timeline, and you would want to make sure that your client is okay that you will work on this piece before the other one. So let's go ahead and document iteration 5 to display the contact details. And we'll follow the app development process. So we start with formulating the problem. And two things we want to work on is the scope. And the scope here is to display the full details for the contact that the user selects. That's the scope. The testing scenario, we have two scenarios. The first one will test the functionality of this feature or of this scope, meaning that user selects the first sample contact and observe the app display that contact details. Then I need to do another one. Why would I need to do another one? To test the integrity of the data. So user selects the second sample contact and then observe that the app displays the corresponding details. I am testing of two different things here. I'm testing for functionality, actually for not for these two, but in general for functionality, meaning that did the functionality work or did it generate an error? And then I'm also testing for integrity, where the data displayed correct. Meaning if I select the first contact and the details bring me those of the second contact, this means that the functionality actually worked, but the data integrity is wrong because you're getting the wrong data that you would be expecting. So you want to test for both. You want to test that the functionality work for all the possible scenarios, and also that the data that comes out of it is accurate and correct. So once we know the scope and how are we going to test it, we go to step 2, which is the solution formulation. And in step 2, we follow the model view controller design pattern. So the model, uh, there will be no change in the model in this case, because we already created the contact person and the list of contacts. In the view, we will make a change. We need to add a contact details screen, and we need to add components to display the details of the contact. So for the contact details screen, because we are learning about the UI table view, I'm going to use UI table view with static cells to display the details. And then I'm going to use the UI label components, since all the details are strings, and the UI label work well for that. UI label components to display the details. Then in the controller, we'll use UI table view controller, or use a custom UI table view controller to display or to manage the details screen. We need to add or connect the label components as outlets, so we can assign data to it. But also in the detail screen, we will how to pass data from the from the list to the details. We learned in project or module 2 about using the segue to connect a property on the receiving or on the destination controller, in the destination controller, to value from the source. And we also learned in project 4 how we can use the standard user default object to put data in that shared resource and then pull that back again when we go to the destination. You can use either one of them since we have strings here. I'm going to use the segue. So we'll use the prepare for segue on the source. So we'll say in the address book table view controller, which that controller for the list, implement the prepare for segue to identify the contact that was selected and assign it to a property in the details screen, which means we have to, in the details screen, we will need to create a property for a contact person, and then use it to populate the label components. You'll see how we're going to do that, but it's very similar to what we did in module number 2. So the solution implementation, I messed up the numbering here. So the solution implementation is our action plan. So first, want to add a screen for the details, and we're going to use the table view controller. And then on that screen, configure the table view on the details screen. Add the label components, so a lot of work on the user interface. Then we need to add, probably before I do that, add custom controller and connect it to the details screen. And then we can implement the custom controllers, then implement the prepare for segue in the address book, test and commit. So let's go ahead and work on that. So the first thing is I need to add another screen. You can use table view, the view controller, like we did in the previous 4 projects, but I'm practicing more with the table view controller, so that's what I'm going to use. So add a table view controller. Then when you add a table view controller, we need to connect the action or the segue that will transition from our address book to the details controller. If you select the screen, the contact cell, so you selecting the cell and press Control and drag, you're able to connect from the cell to the new controller. Notice that there are 2 types of segues or 2 initiators of the segue. The selection event itself, so we can build one based on the selection event, or the accessory action. The accessory is this button that we added. So you can set it up such that if the user click the button, this will be an accessory action, or if the user select the cell, this will be a selection segue. I'm gonna go with the selection segue, and we have the show, and there's a show detail. Maybe we should use that, so we'll use that since we're going into a show detail. Once you add a segue, it just tells you here the source of the segue, and it makes the connection. And it did not add, I don't think it's going to add a back button. So maybe the detail will not be the correct one. Oh, I'm selecting the wrong one. Show detail, e.g. replace. Yeah, let's stay with the show for now. So the show adds the navigation bar from the navigation controller, which will automatically add the back button. So we have that, and so that's the segue. The next step, let's create a custom controller, because this screen is currently managed by the UI table view controller, which is the default controller. So let's add our own custom controller here. So create a new file. I right click in the project navigation, new file, and select Coca Touch class. And then this will be a subclass of UI table view controller, and Xcode remembers. And we're gonna call this contact details. And next, it will tell you where you want to save it. So we'll say here, I'm going to save it inside the project and create. So it creates the contact details class for me. And then I need to link it to our class, our controller, by going to the identity inspector and selecting the contact details as my class. So here is my contact details. So now my new screen is managed by my custom controller. The second part we want to do is that, different from the address book view controller, where I was displaying the list, so I didn't know how many contacts will be in the list. So we followed the in the table view. If you go to the table view, we did dynamic prototyping because I didn't know how many cells will be there. But in the details, I actually know how many cells will be. I need as many cells as I have those properties of the contact, one for the first name, one for the last name, and one for the email address. As such, the dynamic prototyping is not needed, and I can use a static cell. When I set it up to static cells, I can specify how many sections I want. I can make it plain or grouped, and if I do grouped, it gives me a header and a footer. I can separate, create a separator, single line, and you can give it any color you want. And you can give it an inset or not. single selection or no selection. So the table view will have one section, and you can see that the section is made out of 3 cells. If you open the document outliner, and I'm going to hide my project inspector, there is a section in the table view, and if I select the section, you see there's a header and a footer. So in the header, I can say contact details. Here are the details. And then in the footer, I can say press back to return to the list. So the header and the footer are before the grouping of the lists and represent the section. And here's where you can say, I want the 3 rows. So if you had more than first name, last name, and email, you can have 4 rows or 5 or 6, whatever you want. I want 3 because I have only 3 items. Then if you open that, you see the cell, each one of the cells, and you can choose the identifier for the cell. So the basic identifier is the one that gives you a label. So if you open this, there's a content view, and then there's a label, and you can specify the color of that label. So this will be my first name label. And then if you go to the second one, in the cell, I'm going to choose the basic, because I only need that. And you can configure color, you can configure different things as well. And then in the third one, I'm going to make it a basic cell so that it adds, it's like a template that has a label already selected. So now that I added all these 3, I need to connect these labels with my custom controller so that I'm able to assign data to it. So bring in the assistant editor. I'm going to hide my utility area. So the assistant editor will bring the contact detail table view controller. So it's going to be easier to select from the document outliner, because as you can see, there's a hierarchy. So I want to select the label and then press control on your keyboard and drag to the contact details and add an outlet. And I'm going to call this label first name. So it adds an outlet, and we've done that multiple times before. So just follow the process to add an outlet for each of the labels that you have. So we added labels for all the user interface components that we create. So now what is left is to go to the controller, and I need to implement the custom controller and then need to change the prepare for segue. So let me go back to the regular editor, but switch to my contact details table view controller. The template for UI table view controller comes loaded with commented outlines that assumes you are using dynamic prototyping, which was very helpful for us when we worked on the address book. But we don't need any of that working on the static cells. So starting from where it says mark table view data source, because we no longer need that, because we set it up in the storyboard using this static, meaning that it's constant, it's not going to change while your app runs. So all of those need to be removed. So remove all of it. Notice the last line is the closing brace for the controller, so you don't want to delete that. So delete the last comment, the one in green, not the closing brace, and then delete that. And in the view did load, you also want to delete that. So what else do I need to do? I need a property that receives the contact that the user selected. So when the user makes a selection, here, the address book controller will identify the contact that was selected and will send it to this second screen the contact details. The contact details need to have a property to receive it. Then we will assign the text of these labels using that property. So we add a property, and I'm going to call it contact, and we'll give it the type contact person. You can decide like we did in module 2, and we're not going to initialize it. So you add the exclamation mark to suppress the compiler error and tell him that I know that this has a possible that's not initialized, but it's not going to be used until it is initialized. And I can guarantee that because this contact details screen is not accessible without the segue. So once you do that, what do I need to do? I need to use this contact and assign the label, the text field on the labels using its properties. And I'm doing that in view.load, so when the user loads the details, they will see all the actual names and information. So I'll say label first name dot text. We've done that before, and this will be my first name. So I use contact dot first name, and then label last name dot text equal the contact dot last name, and then finally label email address dot text will be the contact dot email address. So this is everything I need to do in the contact details table view control. Then now we move on to the address book. But before we do that, I want to make a stop at the storyboard to confirm that I gave a name to that segue, and I didn't. Every time you add a segue, especially in a project where there will be more than one screen, you need to give the segue a name. And I'll show you how we're going to use that. So the segue need an identifier. So we're going to call this contact details segue. So it is the segue that will show us the contact details. I know that I'm going to be adding later a new contact, add new contact, and the add new contact will also be another segue. So this is why differentiating the two is very important. So this is contact details segue. We gave it an identifier. So now I can move to the address book table view control. In the address book table view controller, all what I need to do is when the user select the contact details, before the segue actually take place, I need to identify the selected item and then retrieve a contact that corresponds with that item and pass it on to the next one. So in the template for the address book I had, if you go all the way down, there is the navigation segue, which gives you the prepare function. So let's uncomment that. So I have the prepare function, which is automatically called every time a segue is initiated. Because there will be more than one segue, I want to start first by limiting my instructions for the particular segue I want. So I do that by using the if statement to check for the identifier of the segue. So I say if the segue.identifier equal, and then use the identifier that I used, contact details segue. If this is the segue identifier, then follow these instructions. So this means that if the identifier is something else, if another segue is being launched, not the one with this identifier, then the instruction I'm providing will not be executed. So it's very important to protect your code. So then what do I need to do? I need to know which one the user select. If you recall back to module 3 when we used the picker view, the picker view did not know what goes inside it. It only knows the index of the row. The table view is the same. So the table view does not know the actual contact that's being displayed, but it does know the index. So to figure out the contact that was selected, I first need to ask the table view about the index that was selected, then use that index to ask the data source about the contact, and then make the assignment. So I can then say let selected index equal, and then use the table view. So since we are extending UI table view, the UI table view already links the table view on the screen with this variable called table view. So I'll say to table view, and then I say I want to know the one that you selected, or it's called index, the index path for selected row. I want the index path for the selected row. And remember, the index path is a combination of the section number and the row number. But I don't need the section number, I need the row number. So I'll say give me the row number. So now that I got the row number, I can get the selected contact by asking the data source to give me the contact at index, and then give it back that selected index. So now I have selected contact. I can then ask the segue to give me a reference to the destination controller. So I say to segue, give me your destination. And the destination is of type UI view controller, which is a generic type. I have to cast it to the actual detail type. So use the as to change the type to contact details table view controller, because that is the type of my the screen. And then I am getting an issue with the selected index. So let's see what that is. It gave me a fix, so let's just follow the fix. And then so we got the destination, and then I'll say that destination dot contact, see, this is the contact that I created, the property that I had to create, equal the selected contact. So this is how I assign value or data that exists in one screen to another property or another item to the second screen. So now the second screen will have access to that contact. So let's test this and see if it will work. I didn't delete all the other comments in address book here because I'm going to be needing it in the next iterations. It is the one in contact details that we're not really going to need. So let's run testing scenario 1. So we selected the name, and then we got the list. So here are the details. It doesn't look that we selected a show segue. That looks like a modal segue. And as you can see, we do not have any back buttons or anything, but it does give me the data, but I won't be able to go back. So let's see. I don't think this is a show segue. I know we had a show detail, but maybe I didn't change it or something. I have a show. Yeah, I don't know why it is showing me it shouldn't be showing me this. It is showing me a modal segue. I see it's showing me the modal segue, and I don't want, I want the show segue. So let's see if this will do. This is a strange. Yeah, here it is. So that's what the show segue should do. So the functionality is working, and I'm seeing different data, and I'm actually seeing the correct data corresponding to the actual contact that I am selecting. So that then verifies the two test scenarios we identified, and completes our iteration number 5. So let's go back and commit those changes to our repository, and we'll continue in the next video with the other iteration. So added the display contact details feature. Commit and push, and that completes iteration 4. Is that 4 or 5? Iteration 5.